Hi everyone. Welcome to the Essentials. What are the essentials? Who can answer that? I'll do it. Free online classes on navigating the photojournalism industry and beyond. This is our sixth season, and it's all been made possible by partnering with the incredible grassroots photo organizations working toward inclusivity, equity, and access in the media. That's the Everyday Projects, Black Women Photographers, and Photo Wings. My name is Danielle Villasana, and in addition to my work as an independent photojournalist, I'm also a community team member of the Everyday Projects, which is a global community of visual storytellers all committed to using imagery to combat harmful misperceptions and to rise above persistent inequality. That is exactly why I wanted to become a photojournalist. So glad that we have these photo organization working towards that every day. And on that note, I would like to introduce the one and only incredible, beautiful, talented Polly Irungu, who is the founder of Black Women Photographers, and she's working tirelessly day after day, year after year to support, elevate, and celebrate the voices of Black and African women creatives, inspiring people everywhere like Taiwo. Girl, Polly, I always think of you. I'm like, I always think of the moment that y'all were in Times Square. So that is the goal, folks. Times Square. All right, Polly, let's hear about Black Women Photographers, although we already know everything there is to know, but.
Oh my God, I'm just here cracking up. Oh my God, Danielle, you were too kind. And you know what's so funny, y'all? Me and Danielle have not met in person yet. We gotta make that happen. Just as a sidebar, but hi everyone, thank you for tuning in. Again, if you're tuning in for the first time, or if you were here earlier, or you're just joining now, please drop your location in the chat where you're tuning in from. We love to see it. And let us know if this is your first Essentials or not, because as Danielle mentioned, this is our sixth season. But hi, everyone. I'm Polly Arungu. I'm the founder of Black Women Photographers. It's a global organization community that I started in 2020. So we are in year 5 of 5 years of celebrating and supporting Black and African women creatives across the globe with free portfolio reviews, workshops, summits, programs like this, the Essentials, our grant initiatives where we give out over 70,000 every year annually to photographers all across the globe. And, you know, for me, it's been so rewarding to see the growth of our members, our community. I mean, members like who we just heard from, like Taiwo, share her story and her work with us. And I'm so excited about the work that we will continue to do. And again, as Danielle mentioned, this series is our sixth season. It is free and it's made possible with Photo Wings. We couldn't do this work without them. And Photo Wings is a nonprofit organization dedicated to utilizing the power of photography to further thinking, communication, and action. Their extensive online content and Photo Wings outreach programs have mirrored educational applications and possibilities, and all of their information and our respective organization information is dropped in the chat so you can learn more.
Oh no, you muted, but she said drop in the chat.
Oh,
um,
sorry.
oh, wait, where are you going? I'd also like to point out a couple of my colleagues here as well, who are helping also tirelessly behind the scenes. Thank you so much to Rebecca Dibian and Austin Merrill, who, along with Peter DeCampo, are the co-founders of the Everyday Projects. Like, for real, Rebecca, Austin, we could not do this without you guys. Y'all are incredible. So thank you so much. And before we continue, I just want to take a moment to honor the life of Sarah Terry, who is in the middle there with the glasses and blonde hair, smiling and just a source of joy and love for everyone. She recently passed away, and she left a huge hole in our hearts and beyond. For real, the visual media is just not going to be the same without her. I don't know, some of you, attending today may have seen tribute posts to her on social media circulating, and they're just the most heartfelt, beautiful tributes that are really encompass her spirit and who she was as a person. She was an amazing photographer and filmmaker and founder of the Aftermath Project. We'll have an award recipient speak about her work today. She was also a contributing photographer to Seven. And our next speaker, Nicole Tung, is a member of Seven. So I know it's really impacted, and rippled throughout all of these communities. She was so loved. And Sarah, for us, she helped us build and grow the Everyday Projects and was a supporter from the start, at first as a contributing photographer. And then when we became a nonprofit, she joined our board of directors. And this is actually a photo after their first board meeting. There's Peter and Austin and a few of the other board members. And she just loved the essentials. She was, Sarah was one of those people who, I mean, she's the, top of the top, like veteran legend. And she would always just take the time to send a message, send an email like, wow, you guys, that was so awesome. Good job. So she was really authentic. And anyway, she loved the essentials and was exactly the kind of thing that she believed in. People supporting and uplifting each other through photography and education. So let's, continue um, that good fight. So, on that note, without further ado, we have an awesome lineup for this weekend with some incredibly stellar teachers. We just had Taiwo I know speak, and we're really excited to have our next speaker. Couple little nuts and bolts. At the end of every presentation, there's a lot of time for Q&A. So please drop your questions in the question box, not necessarily in the chat. It's okay if you do the chat, we'll probably catch it, but just to keep things like that, we make sure we catch everyone, just try to drop it in the Q&A box. Don't be shy. This is such a safe space. Like, you're welcome here. It's a warm and fuzzy place. Please ask all of your questions. There's no question that is silly or too much. We're an open book. And we hope that whether you're starting off at the beginning of this long journey or, somewhere in the middle or the end, we hope that after this weekend, you will feel more confident about your practice. So yeah, and one little nuts and bolts, and then I think we can take it away.
Yes, and as we've mentioned it several times, so we always say this over and over and again, because believe it or not, we still get questions. Yes, every class is being recorded. Yes, all the past seasons are available for you to watch and replay. We even have them transcribed in different languages. I believe it's French and Spanish as well in transcription. And again, they're available on our respective websites. You can go to the Everyday Projects or Black Photographers or PhotoWings website and see all of the past sessions there. From every single topic we've covered to all the future ones. Go and check those classes out, and we will be able to also put these available online shortly after this weekend as well. And for those who don't know, PhotoWings also has a very large archive of amazing videos on all facets of photography. So do check out their website as well for more information.
Yeah. So on that note, Nicole is one of my most dearest friends, and I love her so much. But Polly, would you like to introduce her? Would you like the honor of introducing the
Yeah,
one and only
let's do it.
Nicole? You can come off camera. I want to see your beautiful, shining, brilliant face. There she is.
No, and I'm so excited about this class. And also, like what I mentioned during Tyler's presentation, this is just such a good transition. It's kind of like we planned it. It's kind of like, we really crafted this, intentionally this weekend. And so we are one class down and we've covered so much ground. But guess what? We have so much more to cover. And so this class is all things pitching. And we're so, so lucky to have the one and only Nicole Tung here. If you don't already know who she is, which I'd be hard pressed to believe there's anyone out there who doesn't know her work, she is a freelance photojournalist from Hong Kong and a graduate from New York University who now freelances for international publications and worldwide, primarily covering the Middle East region. Her work often explores those most affected by conflict and the consequences of war. Nicole is the 2025 recipient of the Philip Jones Griffins Award and a finalist for the 2025 Pulitzer Prize in Breaking News Photography as part of a team from her work in Ukraine for the New York Times. She is also the 2025 laureate for Foundation Carmingan's project on overfishing in Southeast Asia. That award is a huge, huge deal. So, congrats, Nicole, for that. And this bio barely scratches the surfaces of all of Nicole's achievements and recognitions. So please check out her website to learn more. And you can find that dropped in the chat. And now the floor is yours, Nicole. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you, Polly, for that really generous introduction. My website, just for anybody who's here listening about pitching, has not been updated in about 2 or 3 years. Not a good start, but I would encourage anybody who, is on this journey that we're all on, update your website. Yes, we still look at websites, I think, and editors still sometimes look at websites and mostly your Instagram, but I think your website is probably the best place to expand on stories a little bit more and have a little bit more depth to, you as a photographer, as a person, and rather than just Instagram kind of trying to showcase everything all the time. So I'm very happy to be here to be presenting about pitching. Over my nearly 15 years of this career, I've had many, many failures of pitching stories, but I will get to that a little bit later. So I'm going to just share my screen so everybody can see what I am talking about. And we're going to go ahead. Here we go. All right, so how to make your pitch break through the noise. Let me just put this onto full screen here. Okay, so what is pitching? Pitching really is about distilling an idea that you have down to its basics and making it make sense to other people, i.e., here, the editors. Pitching your ideas is also about showing how you want to approach a particular visual subject matter. It's about your voice, what you have to say about something, but also there is a fine line of your voice is not necessarily always your opinion in a certain topic, or especially if it's news related or anything like that. You want to leave that open and not have preconceived notions about the thing that you want to delve into or the story idea that you want to delve into. Always have an open mind, always kind of go in with the approach that you will always be able to learn something new and to add something new to the story that you want to pursue. Um, and really, it's what you have to say about something. So how we go about pitching is one of the things I want to address. Why it matters to pitch often, and sometimes, we can learn from failed pitches to try and maybe pivot to doing something a little bit more refined in your ideas or your narrative, or even how you approach editors. These kinds of things are all very important to eventually getting a story, with eyes on it, because sometimes, we might not hear back from editors for weeks. They're busy people, but also maybe your pitch just wasn't quite there. And so any of these tools that I'm about to talk about is they can be used for any kind of genre out there. I'm a photojournalist, so a lot of what I do is about social stories, but also stories in areas of conflict and about conflict themselves. I'm going to go through a very quick background. I'm from Hong Kong originally. I, have, like I said, been doing this for nearly 15 years. I started my career I started photographing in New York City after I graduated. I had worked on a lot of projects during college, and it was because I really wanted to work in international news and news coverage. and news feature stories, not necessarily related to conflict, but I knew I wanted to be able to travel around the world and see, the kinds of stories that many of my now colleagues had been covering. My background was very influenced by, the 9/11 events and after that as well. So, like I said, even after nearly 15 years of doing this, ideas don't always come easy to me or necessarily get approved by editors or even for grants. I think those are the most difficult. Some ideas are just not meant to be, at least for that moment, and sometimes we just kind of have to try and accept that. Um, and the ideas didn't always come naturally to me either. It took me many years to kind of see a lot of things and to have that experience of covering a lot of different kinds of stories to then be able to go, okay, now I feel confident about actually distilling this idea that I have of something that I saw or heard mentioned, and now I can try to put it into a pitch and helping myself get better at identifying these stories to send to the editors. So in pitching, what matters? Who gets to decide what's important? And that's a really open question for anybody, and I don't have like an exact answer. What matters to you may matter differently, or not at all to somebody else. But you ultimately, I do think you get to decide what's important. Um, so you're finding stories to pitch. Um, Generally, that can be pretty easy because there's, a lot of things out there that we can make into a story. And I honestly believe that if you care about what you're pitching, there's more chances that the editor and the audience who ultimately will see the story will care about the subject matter as well. So, if you're sitting there kind of thinking, I have this vague idea, how do I make it matter? Like think about what speaks to other people, and usually those are shared values or shared stories or just kind of universal um, things that bind us all together. Um, of course, again, like it doesn't have to be necessarily from a photojournalist news perspective, but maybe you also have a more, I suppose, abstract idea on a project, for example, like or it can be something to do with climate, for example. So just trying to figure out like where things fit for you and having that balance to make it matter to the audience that you want to see the story. Secondly, timing. Your timing is everything. Why does it matter now? Why do you have to pitch this now? Or why do you have to pursue the story now? Is it related to an event that's coming up or an anniversary, or is it something that is relevant to the here and now? Pitches are always helped by having been well researched. And of course, looking at the publication and checking to see if the story you're pitching is relevant to them. Maybe they've done a similar story recently, and therefore the pitch wouldn't really fly unless there's something really compelling or different about it. There are magazines that are less news oriented, but also do features loosely based around the news. So be aware of not making it seem too newsy sometimes, and vice versa. Newspapers often want timely pieces, though there are some exceptions depending on the story and the publication. Your timing is also tied to an angle, right? And what the angle of the story is what perspective are you coming from? Maybe you're looking at a community that's having like healthcare worker shortage, for example, and um, what's the cause and effect of that, right? So you want to look at maybe following the healthcare workers who no longer can do their jobs properly for whatever reason, or the people who are affected by, this cut in healthcare resources. That's just one example. And the angle is also about like that matters to the community you're documenting in now, or maybe the wider sort of society that you're doing this in. Um, a lot of these things you will find that people have studied over time, and that's why you've probably heard about it. And there's often statistics, people researching these things, and those are people that you want to reach out to because when you make a story, and especially when you make a pitch, you want to have that research in there and that information that comes from somewhere reliable to send to the editors and say, look, this is the research I've found. I've found this kind of pattern, and usually patterns are what makes stories as well, something that occurs several times or repeatedly over a period of time. That can be a short period of time, that can be a long period of time. So all of these little elements make a huge difference to the pitch that you make. It's not just, I have an idea, here it is. Um, and every idea I have is great, therefore you should take it and publish the story or send me on an assignment to do it. You have to kind of really try and refine the idea a little bit more. Maybe the pitch also comes with someone having said something. Maybe a politician said something or whatever and made you go, that's kind of interesting. I want to look into that and find out if A, what they said was true, B, why it's important. So you can really draw like ideas from so many different places and information from so many different places by just kind of keeping an eye out on the subject matter that you're interested in and also, verifying things with people who are close to the subject matter that you're trying to follow. So when you're identifying, something, when you're trying to identify the angle, for example, like in news, we call it the hook or the newsworthiness. Um, in that particular moment or for the new future, is it, you have to think about, is it about something that has happened in the past that I want to revisit now? Is it something that people know little about, or do they already know something, a lot about it? And is there something else that I can bring to the table, to maybe keep the conversation going or have, a different perspective or new perspective to it? And then the next thing you want to think about is, narrative and theme. When I talk about theme, it's about like having a let's say a backbone to the story. And I can show you a little bit later what I mean, because I have these kind of old notes from my previous research when I used to write things down on paper. Um, and when you think about a theme, it's what is the kind of overarching idea of the story that you're doing, and how can you tie all these elements of the story back to this theme? And think of it as like a backbone, right, to the project or the story itself. And you always are able to, branch off a little bit, but always comes back to this kind of main central idea, the theme. Um, and that can really be anything, which I'll talk about a little bit later. In terms of narrative, like, are you, following certain people? What do those certain people add to the story or the project idea that you have? And, all of this has to kind of be distilled then into images, right? Because you don't want to just say, okay, this person has a really interesting story, but how do I include them so that visually it adds to the narrative of the story? So, remind yourself that narratives or even especially themes sometimes can be overpitched or overused. So try and make it unique and try and make it unique to that particular thing that you're trying to pitch. And lastly, the context. Sometimes you might see pictures of, people or a project, and there's pictures that kind of don't really fit into the story itself, and you wonder like what's the context. You always want to have pictures that add something or add more information to your idea. Um, if there's something that is about, let's say, a community, like what does the community look like? What that's the context, you want to show how people live or what that current atmosphere or vibe is in that particular moment that you made this project. So this is an old slide, but like, where do you draw inspiration from? So it can be from anywhere. For me, it's from different photographers, sorry, and different types of photography. Um, also, I used to read a lot of books when I had time, and also photo books and galleries and art and music. It can be anything. Whatever is your sort of thing and where you draw inspiration from, that can be just walking around in the streets and looking at colors or fashion or textures and things like that. Inspiration can come from a lot of different places. It's how you use them and then try and figure out, making a story um, out of it that really matters. Is it like maybe a color is becomes your theme or like the way that you photograph something because it suits the story. Like all of this can come from just seeing things and having ideas and taking note of those things over time. So this is, a bit of research that I've done in the past about various like stories that I've wanted to pursue. I, print out articles that have been published. I also look at lots of maps. Maps are really helpful to me to visualize, the scale of something, and also like identify where is important to go geographically. So I, would take down notes and I would sort of like look at, okay, certain points that I really want to touch on. And, all this research would be out there. Now I have usually about 200 tabs open on my browser. That's my research. Um, just be a little bit more organized. So yeah, this is kind of how this is my approach to it, and you can have a very different approach to it yourself. But generally speaking, a lot of research with information is really helpful to what you're doing, especially if it's something to do with a news-related story. If you're doing more conceptual or, portraiture, maybe your research is going to look very different from this as well. Again, I like maps and sometimes even like drawing maps out helps me visualize how I want to approach a story. So this map, I was like trying to pitch a story, which I will show you the pitch for later on, that didn't really work, probably because of the timing, but also the logistical challenges I faced in actually, doing the story itself. And here are my notebooks and things that I collected and picture, contact sheets that I had from a long time ago that sometimes I don't shoot film, obviously, very often anymore, but it's nice to go back to physical, things to look at and think, I wonder what I was thinking when I took that picture, for example. I read a lot of news magazines and whatnot, and these are, just the things that I kind of sometimes go back to. I'll have written something randomly in them and go, oh, that was an interesting idea. Maybe I should explore that again. Um, so here was one story, which I'll show you in a minute, which is about violence against women in Turkey. And it was a story that I pitched to get grant funding from the International Women's Media Foundation back in 2017, I want to say. And so I kind of sat down and I made, this is a spider chart, but you can, do it however you want. And I kind of looked at like what angles that I needed to explore in this particular subject. So the idea came about after hearing about numerous stories of femicide, of women being murdered in Turkey, and that number, right, the statistic was increasing. And so, in order to bring the story home, instead of just talking about statistics, I wanted to visit, the families of survivors and also the families of the victims. So, I look at the reasons behind rising violence. I looked at the reason, things were getting worse in terms of the political climate in Turkey at the time. And then, down on the bottom left, you can see like, okay, how can I visualize all this? Because a lot of the women were no longer here. So, it's a very morbid looking chart. I can honestly say that, but it helped me understand kind of like what I needed to address. And sometimes they were very difficult, for access, people like lawyers or law enforcement to get records from the past, things like that. That's really hard, but it's still worth kind of exploring, if you can, because then that adds more element to your story itself. So I got in touch with a lot of activists who in Turkey were working on this particular issue of violence against women, and particularly murders of women, usually by partners known to them or ex-partners known to them. And then I pitched the story to the IWMF to get grant funding for it. They approved it, gave me the funding, and then afterwards I had to then publish the story. So after a couple of months, I gathered a lot of the images and I pitched it out to multiple publications. A couple of them picked it up. The New York Times picked it up in the opinion section. And so I wrote some of the text along with another colleague, and we looked at, kind of how to present the story, which usually is up to the editor, but we were very careful in the images being selected. But the approach to the story itself was very, I wouldn't say straightforward, but it was really about, the families of the victims, and also, what questioning whether or not there would be justice in the end. I'm going to talk a little bit about a failed pitch that I made a couple of years ago, I think during COVID. So this one was about the river, that map I'd shown earlier. I wanted to do something on the Euphrates River in Syria and talk about how the climate was kind of exacerbating the war there. And, I think because of the timing, but also the dangers of working in an environment at that time along a river where ISIS was very active, the war was still going on in Syria. It was just very difficult to get editors to be interested in this story. I think they were interested, but it was more logistically challenging, also cost-wise not very effective for them, and also the danger aspect was a lot. So this is usually, I don't write such long texts anymore because it's very time consuming for editors to read. But this, as you can see, there's a lot of statistics, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of quotes in here, and it's researched relatively well. So then I also included, a couple of pictures. I put them into a PDF from like pictures that I've made in the region before to kind of try and direct some sort of illustration, to say, visually, this is what it might uh, look like or something similar to. So, but ultimately, nobody sent me out there to do the project, and I didn't push it that hard. Um, but then here's the example of a successful pitch. In 2022, was covering the conflict in Ukraine, and I was working with the New York Times, and they, were asking photographers like, can we, think about stories to do? And so in 2023, I believe it was, I was, covering the conflict, covering the news, but also looking at deeper stories to do that weren't just necessarily about the daily survival of people through a war. I wanted to look at what legacy this war would leave behind, even as it was continuing. So I pitched a story about how soldiers were coping with post-traumatic stress and having to continuously be on the front lines without much of a break. And so I found through research with my producers and many Ukrainian colleagues that a lot of Ukrainian soldiers who were exhibiting a lot of psychological issues on the front line were being sent to these uh, centers for essentially rehabilitation so that they could get above a baseline to sort of feel a little bit better to go back out onto the front line to fight again. And so I pitched this, and we kind of identified various places where these soldiers were having various types of therapy. And the research that came with it was, we had to look at how the Ukrainian military was trying to find ways of, helping their soldiers. A lot of these lessons were taken from um, US soldiers in their past, experiences of conflict. Um, so we did, a couple of places around Ukraine and looked at how the recovery of, at least the temporary recovery of soldiers was going, and how, the Ukrainians were also trying to find new methods of rehabilitating soldiers, not just talk therapy, but like using, aromatherapy and aquatherapy, horses, things like that. And of course, I also met a few of the soldiers who were coming back from the front line and wanted to get a sense of their more intimate lives at home as well. So that's how the story looked. On the left-hand side, you can see was like how it was published in the newspaper. And these are two other stories that I pitched also from Ukraine that were, one was about the Dnipro River that runs through the country, and that was sort of the de facto, split between the eastern and western part of the country, and about how women were coping as widows as well. So the last points I want to make is, the best way to pitch is to have a very kind of small set of images that, might help illustrate the story that you want to do if you already have those pictures. If not, that's fine. But at least have your portfolio really polished as much as possible. Um, you know, Put in the information in a text, nothing too long, not 10 pages that the editors can't read. Um, and try and make the pitch as relevant as possible to the publication you're pitching to the editors that you're pitching to as well. And just a reminder that editors are really busy people. They don't often have time to read pages of long pitches. And if they're interested, they may come back to you to ask you for more details or budget and an idea of how you may go about doing the story. Um, and in your initial pitch, you might also want to describe any context that you've already established and what logistics you've already planned, how you plan on photographing it, and what your vision is essentially for the story itself. But try and keep it succinct and try and keep it short as well. So that's what I have for today, and I'm ready to take any questions.
Oh my
Incredible.
goodness. Polly and I are both like, ah, wow. I mean, what an incredible wealth of information. I'm just like, man, if only I had seen a webinar with Nicole Tung when I was first starting off, I would probably be like light years, you know. Hello, would have been me. Thank you, Nicole, for sharing so
Welcome.
generously all of your wisdom and experience. And as I mentioned, I mean, I'm just so in awe of you as a human and who you are as a person, and it just shows
Oh,
so
thank
much
you.
through your work and your generosity. And yeah, so thank you, thank you, thank you. There are so many questions, so we're just gonna like start pow pow pow. So, what I would really love to know, and other folks as well, because it's come up as a question, but pitching can be so tough, so excruciating. I know in our coffee chats and dates when we're just like, what's happening? You got to do the research, the reaching out, hearing the no's, not hearing from editors, especially on a pitch you really love. So, could you tell us a little bit more and explore a little bit more about how you keep going? How do you keep putting your pitches out there? How do you remain resilient? How do you stay motivated and on task? How do you not like let the let it get to you, let it get to your heart?
Yes, you have to have really thick skin. No, it's a good question. And thank you, Polly and Danielle, again, for the generosity and also just having me here. As far as how do you keep going, I will say that even after having done this for a while, 95% of the time, you will get a negative answer. And that doesn't always have to do with the quality of the idea you have or even your work. It can be very demoralizing when you get told no or just get ignored completely. But just remember that it's a very saturated industry in which there's so much going on all the time. And you just have to keep trying, but also, yeah, have faith in yourself and have faith in the idea that you have. Maybe you share it with friends to ask for feedback in terms of how you can refine the pitch itself, or does it make sense to them? Like if it only makes sense to you, then the chances are it's not going to make sense to an editor. So it's a very fine kind of mix of like a dash of this and a dash of that in your little cauldron of making ideas and making them uh, successful. So it's a lot of trying, it's a lot of not giving up, and just making sure that when you do pitch, that you've got as much research in there as possible. Don't always give everything away as well, though. Like, again, it's important not to share everything with an editor so that you can keep some things close to your heart, especially if they're contacts or things that information that other people really don't know about until you gauge their interest in the story itself.
Yes. Oh my gosh, thick skin. Thick skin, and a heart that is strong. Um, and I would say too, like, again, looking at you and your work and all of the passion that you have for what you do, um, truly, Nicole is one of the most passionate people for the stories that she's photographing that I've ever met, like as her friend, impossible to pull her away from her work. And so that passion that you have to have, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that part of like what helps you remain resilient, that you have this authentic and very genuine passion for the stories that you're telling, for the people you're photographing? So it's almost like when you get the no's, it almost doesn't matter because you're more focused on like, well, I'm focused on the story and the people, and like one way or another, we're going to get that out there. Like your priorities are more on your passion for getting that story out there, I would say, from the work that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sometimes your passion, though, has to kind of be put on a bookshelf for just a little while. Like it might not be the right moment for it, for whatever reason. That could be publications' budgets or the fact that they're so busy with other things. But just like being patient with it, and also that gives you time to develop other ideas for the story itself. So, I think if you get a no for something, try another publication and then try another publication. And if every single one that you've tried out of 10 or 15 of them have said no, then maybe go back to the drawing board or give it a little bit of a rest for now and then try something else. Or tweak the angle, maybe. I think also it's important to mention that we have to remember the publications that we're pitching to. Not every single one I don't think you should pitch your story or the way that you've presented it into exactly the same way to each and every single publication because each and every single publication will have a slightly different way of presenting or maybe have a different take on things or so kind of try and tailor it when you can. That's also important too.
Yeah. Okay, well that was awesome. I love that like bookshelving passion for a little bit and being a little bit more like you it's like you said it's like one part passion and one part also just like we've got to put like our critical thinking almost like business for lack of a better word brain on right and kind of keep those two things separate. So on that note of tips and tricks and do's and don'ts, we have some very specific questions like for example, do you have any advice for how to craft a subject line to get editors' attention, or introducing yourself first in the pitch to make sure they know you're legit. And then how often do you start shooting before pitching in order to illustrate your pitch? And then lastly, should you send images along with the pitch? If so, how many? What's a good number? So that kind of like more like brass tacks sort of questions.
Yeah. Subject line, don't just say hello. I would say, in the subject line, it could be like story pitch, and a very short sentence on what the subject matter is. And of course, introduce yourself if you've never communicated with this editor before. Have like a short paragraph of this is what I do. I'm based here. This is the story that I'm interested in. Here's my pitch. Put it into a PDF. Don't put, a huge number of pictures into an email attachment, which may go to their junk. I would, I think at minimum, put maybe 5 pictures into a story pitch in a PDF along with a little bit of text. Maximum 10 images to not give away too much as well. And also, have that edit checked over by other people. So I think that's what you should aim for in a pitch to keep it short and sweet, but also informative and to show that you've done your research as well, to keep that balance. And then, yeah, I would say sometimes editors don't respond. And I would try and follow up at least once or twice more every maybe 1 week to 10 days. So if they haven't responded to you in a week or 10 days time, just give them a nudge and say, hi, this was my pitch to you. And then if they still don't respond, maybe one last time 10 days later. And then you can like try and move on to other publications, and just, try your luck with different regions of the world too. Like maybe you're pitching to European publications and they're not that interested. Then you can try, other publications in other parts of the world too that where they might have interest in the story uh from where you're doing it. As far as like how much time should you invest in the story before pitching it? It really depends on your budget. If you can afford to do some of the photos before actually pitching the story or pitching the story while you're doing something, that really depends. Some people get assignments to do a story and they want to stay invested in that story and they want to keep following it. So you might use, a couple of pictures from that assignment and go, look, I started this story, I've done this story, but I want to keep going with it and pursue it in this direction. Here's what I have from that. And you could do it that way. Or if you don't have the budget or it's, geographically too far from you to do it yourself, then like I said, have a nice polished portfolio to give editors a sense of how you work and also the idea that you might be focusing on.
Awesome. Okay, I just have a quick piggyback. I know Polly has a lot more questions for us and also wants to speak with you. But just a quick piggyback. So, and maybe because I'm also personally curious what you do. But what do you do if the story is timely, right? Because then following up factors into that. So, what do you do if the story is timely? How soon after you pitch do you follow up? Timely versus non-timely. And what is your protocol? What is your approach to pitching multiple publications at once if it's for a timely story? And then Polly, your
Yeah,
turn.
so if if it's timely, I would put something else in the subject line too, which is, not like urgent, you know, flash bulbs going off, exclamation mark, because that's not professional. I would just say, you know, in the subject matter, it would just be story pitch on, you know, news related event, whatever it is, but also keep it short. And the follow-up time with that is, you know, it could be a couple of days if it's something to that is like news related, especially. Um, it could be a couple of days, but I wouldn't just stick to one publication in that sense then. If it's really kind of timely, I would pitch to multiple publications, and the first one that gets back to me, you know, with a positive answer, uh, then I'll go with that. But then let's say, you know, 2 hours later, and a different publication gets back to me and says, "Oh yeah, we'd love to do that," or "Can you get on this?" Then it's kind of they have to understand that, you know, as freelancers, you have to jump at the first opportunity. And you can just say to the second publication, look, sorry, you know, I already pitched it and I'm working on something already. Sorry, but thanks so much for replying to me and getting back to me. Maybe something will come up again next time and we have an opportunity to work together. So being very professional about it, really, and editors do have an understanding of that too.
100%. And if I may, I also just give like a quick like tidbit on that, just because this is such great advice. And I feel like a lot of this is like sometimes there's like the unspoken rules, but then there's also like the things that you're saying here that, when it comes down to it's just like being professional. I remember on your note, like about the timely question, Danielle. When I was living in Oklahoma, I was pitching a story about the 100-year anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And the good thing about when things are timely is editors also have that timeliness factor in mind too. They're probably already working on it. So when you put like what Nicole said, the subject of whatever the issue is and the news story or whatever it may be in the subject, they already know there's a timeline, a deadline for that story. Like, right? Like the anniversary is on a specific date. So they're already working with some sort of urgency. So you don't have to like put too much pressure on them on that, like what Nicole's point about being professional. But also be mindful of, okay, if you're pitching to multiple, maybe you should start with your first favorite, your first choice, right? And then maybe the second choice. And just, be mindful of how early you are pitching and also really be take into consideration that things always move quickly in newsrooms. Like Nicole said, like, you know, they may get back to you, or maybe you get some, or somebody else gets back to you first, or whatever it may be. But things move quickly, so don't wait to pitch. Pitch early, and that way you don't feel like this like rush at the end, like, oh, like nobody has gone back to me type of thing. But in that sense, there's also a question here, Nicole, about how long have you worked on a story before you pitched? Does the editor want you to have begun or not begun the process when you're sending out pitches?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in a lot of, or in most cases, I've not actually spent any time working on the stories themselves before pitching them. In some cases, it's just an idea that I have, or something that, again, I've heard through the grapevine or have looked into and researched a little bit and then just pitched it. I don't think editors really have a preference. I mean, they would love to publish, you know, work that's already done so they don't necessarily have to shell out the budget for it, I would say, but I wouldn't have like don't feel any less confident pitching a story just because you don't have the photos for it. Go for it, you know, pitch the story if it's important to you and if you have done the research for it and things like that, and you feel confident about the importance and the relevance and the timeliness of it, then do so, even if you don't have pictures to show for it, because that's the whole idea, right? Like you have an idea to go and pursue something. Here's why it's important, X, Y, and Z. And, you know, these are the things that I think are achievable for this story. Certain things are a little bit more difficult, but I'm working on arranging access. These kinds of things help editors understand what your process is and that you're not just like, oh, I have an idea, it's very vague. Again, also sometimes general and very vague ideas don't fly very well. So try and be quite specific about what it is your idea is and what is actually achievable in terms of the visuals so that they can then start thinking, okay, this is how we can do it, and maybe we can present it this way. The story is important because of this and that. So yeah, all of these factors come into play, and it's not just the fact that you don't or do have photos for the story already.
It really seems like such a balancing act, right, when it comes to pitching. Because like you also mentioned that when you're sharing photos, like no more than 10, if you were to share photos, and then not to be vague, but still give information, but not too much information. So how do you like balance that of like when you're pitching, like do you have any guidelines for how much you share and when not to share? And in the same sense, also because I feel like we've all heard stories about when it comes to maybe not in the editorial sense, but maybe sometimes too, but like with brands or whatever, maybe people are afraid to pitch their ideas because they don't want it to be stolen, or that you pitch the editor and they're like, "Oh, that's a great idea. Let's assign it to somebody in-house versus you doing the story." So how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think if there's information that's publicly available that you've included in your pitch, that can be just uh, basic facts or information, statistics, things like that. That's okay to include because, that's research. But if it's things like, well, there's this one particular person that lives on this street who I have made contact with and who is really essential for this story. Maybe don't include that or, have a vague reference to it, but to at least say, I have contacts that can help with this or talk about that. But I think very specific information that only you may know and have researched already, maybe leave that out and just have a vague reference to the fact that you're establishing communication with people and that you've reached out and things like that. So yeah, it is a very fine balancing act to have and not share too much of it, but also not be too vague, but also not too specific. Just somewhere in the middle is
Yeah.
very good. But also, I want somebody was asking about do you pitch stories with a writer in mind?
That's the next
Uh,
question I was going to ask you. Yes.
yeah. Or I'm telepathing with you. So if it's really up to you. Like if you, a lot of publications will want to assign, their writers to the story if they are in agreement to take your pitch. Sometimes the best way to go about it is actually through the writers themselves, depending on the publication too. But I think that, if it's something that you're not so sure about, if whether they're going to assign a writer or not assign a writer, be prepared to also put your hand up and say, I can also write if you want to, right? You don't have to. Because if this is a story that you're going to invest a lot of time in, you're going to know most about it, and you're going to probably speak to people about it and have that ability to at least document or write down some quotes and things that they say that are relevant to the story too. So it can be either or. Like I have written stories for the visuals that I've pitched, like for example, the one about the PTSD and soldiers in Ukraine, also on the violence against women, like those were stories that I wrote. And also I felt compelled to write them because they were stories that I had followed through and felt really close to as well, and that I felt that I would be able to best, write about as I spoke to all of the people, interviewed them, and all of this. So it really is up to you. But also don't expect that if you put your hand up to write that they will go, okay, you write it as well, because they, have their way of editing, they have their way of text being, written a certain way as well. So just have an open mind. And if it can be pitched, in a way that's just purely focused on the visuals, but also leaving that door open to writing, I think that's often the best approach.
And just a very quick follow-up on that. When if you are doing both the photo and the writing, those are two separate rates. You get to pay
They
or
should be. They
okay,
should
just
be.
making sure that we clarify for people. Yes.
Not always, but you should make that clear. If the publication is like, okay, can you write the story and can you do the photos, then your natural follow-up to that should be, okay, so how much per word and also I'm gonna, take this number of days to photograph the story. Um, Make it clear, like ask them what's the rate for this and what's the rate for this, because they usually are supposed to be two separate things. However, if you're on an assignment and you've pitched a story and you're there to like do coverage, they may not pay you two separate rates for it. And that's, it really depends on what you're like. Do you want the story really badly? Yes. And are you willing to give up a little bit of that for, the story to get out there? That's really a question that only you can answer.
Thank you, Nicole. Danielle, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. We have, I mean, just like probably 50 questions that have come through on your session, Nicole. You're just sharing so much awesome information. Someone just wrote like, wow, this is incredible. So thank you for being so generous with your knowledge. So kind of it's not necessarily specifically focused on pitching, but sometimes these things go hand in hand, and you mentioned it in your presentation. But on the topic of grants, so excuse me, when someone says, when you pitch to publications, do you often already have the project or story done from grants that you've received? Where do you find the grants that help you fund these projects? How do you sort of walk that line between like grants and pitching when that happens? I know, you're not always, a lot of your work is assignment work, but when it does come to grants, how are you navigating that a little bit? If you could expand further on that, we've got some questions related to grants.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think if you have pitched an idea to multiple publications and have not been very successful with them getting picked up or assigned to do the story that you want to do, then maybe the next step is, okay, what grants are out there to fund me to do this project? And then since the work will have mostly been done, because I can possibly get a grant, then maybe the publications will be interested in publishing that too. I know it's a very long slog and it's very discouraging sometimes, but maybe sometimes the best way to do it is having a little bit of leeway and time and funding to do it without that pressure of being on an assignment. So when you look at places for applying for funding, um, again, look at the relevance to the organization you're applying from. Like if your story is, about something that a subject that they may not usually touch or something like that, then maybe give that a pass or try a different organization. So you just have to research what grants are out there. There's also a lot of like awards now that are actually grant money. So, think about those too. They're not just cash awards. They're awards that basically are funding to help you start a project or complete a project. So it's really just keeping your eye out for all of these resources that are out there. And time and again, I'm sure on social media, you'll see them pop up and say, apply for this or deadline is this, and just being engaged in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good method too could be, a lot of these organizations, the Everyday Projects, Black Women Photographers, Women Photograph, Diversify Photo, Magnum Foundation, they all have newsletters. So sign up for their newsletters so that when they have a grant coming up, you'll be reminded of it through their newsletter. I'm always scanning newsletters, to see what's coming up, what people are doing. So that's an easy way because it will come to you. You don't necessarily have to seek it out. And yeah, so grants, yeah, grants. And, in my own personal experience, sometimes grant and pitching can go a little bit hand in hand. Like any effort you do, right, Nicole, is going to like improve what you're doing, what you're thinking, right? So like Nicole said, if your pitch isn't having much success, like go back to the drawing board or think about applying for a grant, and all that work that you did, the research, the pitching, the trying to convince, that's going to be super useful when you apply for a grant too, because you have to answer those questions in a grant as well. Why now? Why is this important? Why me? You have a little bit more space to expand and convince and etc. But everything you do is building off of each other, right? So no work or effort that you put in is ever going to like go to waste per se. So thank you again for bringing that up. So we have time for one last question, and it's going to be I would just really love to hear what you have to say about this. I think you're the perfect person to answer this question. So you mentioned it a little bit in your presentation, but can you talk a little bit more about legacy, like the legacy of a story, the impact both now and going forward? Is that something you think about? Of course, I mean, you're like brilliant, but is that something, is legacy something that you think about a lot before you embark on a story, during the story, after the story's been published years later? How important is that impact of a story to you and in your work?
That's a great question. I think it's not always an active thought in the back of my head when I'm pitching this story, but then you kind of come to realization like during the process of making the story of what the legacy could be. So, and because I work in a news context, a lot of the stories that I've done are about what's the lasting legacy of this conflict on let's say, soldiers and coming back home and how they'll deal with post-traumatic stress and then also addressing all of the societal issues that come with that. A lot of amputees, but also it's known that the rate of domestic violence increases when people go untreated because of war-related, traumas, things like that. So, that can be a legacy. Or in Iraq and Syria, for example, like there was a lot of news for a period of time between 2017 and 2019 after ISIS was like kicked out of certain areas. And so the way I thought about legacy was what is the legacy of, these two very intertwined conflicts and what are the lasting impacts on the communities there? How are they going to rebuild? How are they going to overcome this especially traumatic period of time? So yeah, I think it's always worth thinking about going back to what I said in the beginning, the context, and that's how you kind of go about establishing what the legacy could be. You have to question, things from the past and how things from the present right now are kind of colliding with that and what that looks like for the future. And that could be any subject matter as well. Someone asked about like, how do you I don't see the question anymore, but about like if you're not doing photojournalism, but more conceptual and artistic um, uh, stories, like how do you make them relevant? Well, I think it's much in the same way. You just have to talk about your approach, why it's important, and why it's important to do right now. And also what that legacy is. Like, is it something, that has to do with past or memory or identity and things like that? These are all related somehow to legacy.
Oh, that is just so brilliant. There's so many things to take away from this class. I mean, like what you said, why this story? Why now? Why are you the one to tell this story? The timeliness, the do's and don'ts. Thank you for taking such a daunting. I feel like it can be such an overwhelming topic pitching and just simplifying it and breaking it down for us. And I hope those who are listening, for those who are, early on in their career, you also don't have to wait to be assigned a story. A lot of the first stories I told were the ones I assigned myself. Here I'm living in the US, I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area. There's a lot of like protests happening this weekend. If I was a new photographer and maybe I don't have the portfolio to pitch the New York Times right now, I would just go down and photograph those protests, right? And just have that, build that portfolio. And we also have past classes on how to go and photograph protest safely. So there's a class for that too. So I don't want you just to jump in right there and not feel prepared, because we do have past classes that you can watch about tips and tricks and things to keep in mind for your safety, physical and digital safety when covering hard issues. But don't wait to get assigned. You can also assign yourself, and that's how you can build your portfolio and be able to work with these publications that our speakers have been able to work with. Nicole, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we go?
Thank you all. Yeah, I suppose it's just don't give up on your ideas and don't ever feel like just because you've been told no 1,000 times doesn't mean that maybe that one time um, someone accepts your pitch or your idea won't happen. So don't give up and always try and think of how to refine an idea or go about it in a different way. There's more than one way to do things. So yeah, good luck.
Awesome. Oh, thank you so much, Nicole, again for your generosity. And it's just so cool to for to see someone, like you who has accomplished so much, to just be so generous and to break it down for those of us, um, who can always continue to learn and who are starting off. This is just gold, golden, golden. So thank you so much again, Nicole. And I think we should change our title of the essentials to "Don't Give Up" because Taiwan said that, you said that. Like just keep trying, y'all. Keep trying, stay strong, don't give up. So perfect way to end that. After a short break, we'll be starting the next class with Magnum Foundation Sarah Perlmutter and Nada Harib, who will be breaking down again, generously breaking down the nitty-gritty of applying for grants. Like Polly said, wow, it's like we planned this or something. Um,
Thank you all. Thank you, Danielle and Polly, and also Everyday Projects. And thank you for all the great questions.
Thank
Oh,
you so
thank
much,
you,
Everybody.
Nicole.
All right.
Nicole.
Bye.
Yeah, and grants is definitely something we all have an appetite to learn more about. So please stay on. We wanted to once again thank our partner Photo Wings, whose mission it is to highlight and help facilitate the power of photography to influence the world. As a nonprofit, they help photography to be better understood, created, utilized, seen, and saved, which is exactly what we're doing here. So thank you once again, Photo Wings. We love you.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Photo Wings. Because of Photo Wings, all of our classes are free. And like we said at the beginning, this is season 6. So that means there's 5 past seasons that you can replay, and they're available on our respective websites at Everyday Projects and Black Photographers. Go binge them. We even have some of the classes transcribed in different languages, I believe French and Spanish. So bookmark our websites. We drop our information in the chat, and go replay and take notes and share those notes on social media. Let folks know how vital and how helpful these classes are for photojournalists, for storytellers all across the globe. And like Danielle said, we'll just be taking a quick 30-minute break, just 30 minutes, okay, y'all? So you don't even have to sign out. You can just come back here in 30 minutes, or you can just sign out, sign back in if you'd like. But we'll just take a 30-minute break. So that's 1 p.m. Eastern time, or just in 30 minutes, we'll be right back with our next class. So go
Yeah.
stretch, get yourself some food, whatever you need, and we'll be right back with more vital information. Right, Danielle?
Yes, exactly. Or we'll just do what Anastas recommended and just do a week-long, 8-hour-long sessions and just never stop. But this year, we're going to take a 30-minute break. So we'll see y'all soon. And then just listen for mine and Polly's voice. We're back.
All right,
Okay.
I'll see
Bye,
y'all in
y'all.
30 minutes.
Y'all
Thank you.
soon.